All right, family, Scrapbook Boxing, Museum of the Forgotten Fisticuff series. Let's get into part 2 of the third wave of Black Murdersrow. We're looking at the schedule to see whether these men were worthy of a title shot or not. And I'd like to go back to March 21st, 1938. Charley Burley and Fizzy Zivic would get it on in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Now, they were both from Pittsburgh. But Fizzy Zivic was the crowd favorite. Charley Burley was the most respected between the two men because he was the man that they thought would get a title shot and bring home to the city of Pittsburgh. So Fizzy Zivic would become the welterweight champion October 4th, 1940, when he would defeat then welterweight champion Henry Armstrong, New York's Madison Square Garden. The verdict went to Fizzy Zivic. Fizzy Zivic had 4 brothers. 2 of them participated in the Olympic Games in 1928. So the Zivic brothers were very popular. And Fizzy Zivic was not ranked in the top 4. He might not even been ranked in the top 5 at that time. Charley Burley was ranked number 3. And Henry Armstrong would defeat Cephalino Garcia. So the 2 men next in line were Fizzy Zivic and Charley Burley. Now, Holman Williams was in that mix at this point. And Holman Williams and Charley Burley would mix it up several times, as well as Coco Kid. He was ranked number 7. Fizzy Zivic would be given the nod. June 13th, 1938, Charley Burley would defeat Fizzy Zivic, New York's Madison Square Garden. Now, let's sit on that for one moment. I just told you that both men were from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I also told you that Fizzy Zivic was the crowd favorite. I explained to you that Charley Burley was the most respected, and he was expected to bring home the welterweight championship crown. All the work that he has put in from amateur to professional leading up to that point. So Zivic was given the verdict in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Burley was given the verdict in New York's Madison Square Garden, away from home. Charley Burley was blackballed, no pun intended. Because every time he was in line for a title shot, they would either rob him from a decision or there would be some excuse as to why he was not given that shot. August 17th, 1938, Henry Armstrong would defeat Lou Ambers in 15 rounds, and he would win the World Lightweight Championship crown, New York's Madison Square Garden. So now you had Henry Armstrong, a 3-weight division champion, and he would hold all those titles simultaneously. And I think I mentioned this in the first video. Now you had all the divisions showed up by black fighters other than the middleweight division. August 23rd, 1938, Charley Burley would defeat Coco Kid, and he would now win the colored welterweight championship crown. He defeated Coco Kid in Melville, Pennsylvania. That put him in line for a title shot opportunity. Ernie Redrick was from Europe. 1939, he'd be given a shot at Henry Armstrong's crown. September 1st, 1938, Lloyd Marshall would defeat Ken Overland for the Middleweight Championship. Well, it wasn't a title shot, but Ken Overland would eventually become a middleweight champion when he would defeat Cephalino Garcia. Garcia would have the title in 1940. I want you to pay close attention to what's happening here. November 25th, 1938, Henry Armstrong would defeat Cephalino Garcia, World Welterweight Championship title defense in New York's Madison Square Garden. January 25th, 1939, Holman Williams draws 6 rounds with Eddie Booker in New York's Madison Square Garden. Now, Holman Williams is considering moving up to the middleweight division. January 25th, Joe Louis wins in 15 rounds. New York's Madison Square Garden. The World Heavyweight Championship belt. Title defense. He would take on a fighter by the name of John Henry Lewis. John Henry Lewis needed the bread because they stripped him of a title, one of his belts, because he didn't pass an eye examination test. They would give that title belt Tiger Jack Fox, who had to actually fight for the belt. It would be given to him, but it was somewhat vacant, so he had to fight Milo Patina. Because Tiger Jack Fox was the mandatory for John Henry Lewis. Milo Patina would be given the verdict of Tiger Jack Fox. So now Milo Patina would be the light heavyweight champion. So they would remove the belt out of the hands of John Henry Lewis. And Tiger Jack Fox, who was next in line, they made sure he didn't get the title. I want you to pay close attention to what's happening here. Tiger Jack Fox was a black fighter. February 22nd, 1939. Lloyd Marshall would lose 10 rounds to middleweight Cephalino Garcia. Pay attention. March 9th, 1939, Coco Kid, who would win 10 rounds against Eddie Booker in New Haven, Connecticut. March 17th, 1939, Lloyd Marshall would now knock out Filipinos' future world middleweight champion, Cephalino Garcia. 5 rounds. So Lloyd Marshall was knocked out by, let me make it clear, Cephalino Garcia. May 17th, 1939, Lloyd Marshall knocks out Eddie Babe Briscoe, who would become a middleweight champion. June of 1939, Joe Louis would knock out two-ton Tony Galento, 4 rounds in New York's Yankee Stadium. August 22nd, 1939, Henry Armstrong would lose 15 rounds to Lou Ambers in New York's Madison Square Garden. He would lose the lightweight crown. September 29th, 1939, Lloyd Marshall would win in 10 rounds against Teddy Roth, San Francisco, California. October 1939, Henry Armstrong would defend his welterweight championship crown 5 times against Howard Scott, Richie Fontaine, Jimmy Garrison, Al Manfredo. Pay attention to Henry Armstrong's schedule. June 6, 1939, Lloyd Marshall would defeat Lou Bullard in 10 rounds. January 11th, 1940, Coco Kid defeats Holman Williams in 15 rounds. They fought in Baltimore, Maryland, and it would be for the Colored World Welterweight Championship crown. January 15th, 1940, Jimmy Bivens begins his professional debut in Cleveland, Ohio. First round technical knockout, Amari Morgan. February 9th, 1940, Arturo Godoy lost 15 rounds in a match with Joe Louis at the New York Madison Square Garden. It was for Joe Louis's heavyweight championship belt. March 1st, 1940, Henry Armstrong draws 10 rounds with Cephalino Garcia, Los Angeles, California. Let's unpack that for one moment. Now, Henry Armstrong defeated Cephalino Garcia, 1938. Garcia would eventually move up to the middleweight division. Now, Cephalino Garcia wasn't weight drained because he walked in that middleweight championship bout weighing 149 pounds. When he was fighting as a contender for the title. He would meet up with Henry Armstrong. They were supposed to fight in New York's Madison Square Garden. It was supposed to be a 15-round fight. But they made concessions for Cephalino Garcia. And they moved the fight over to California. Now, California was a state where they would have a 10-round championship fight. There was a few states like that. And it was perfectly designed because they knew Henry Armstrong was going to defeat Cephalino Garcia. And they couldn't get away from Garcia because, Cephalino Garcia could not get away from Henry Armstrong because Cephalino Garcia was supposed to face Barney Ross once again. And Eddie Meade made that contract with Ross. But Armstrong defeated Barney Ross. So now that contract was supposed to apply to Henry Armstrong. So they wind up meeting as a middleweight. So they brought in a referee by the name of George Blake. They went to California so the fight would be 10 rounds. And George Blake would take 5 rounds away from Henry Armstrong for what was claimed to be excessive low blows. So when the fight was over, after 10 rounds, they scored it even. They made it a draw. The referee George Blake ran out of the arena. He didn't stay there for the announcement. No one raised Cephalino Garcia's hand or Henry Armstrong's hand. He was gone. They found him trying to catch a cab. Brought him back. He no longer refereed any matches after that, after there was an investigation. And they called it even. Henry Armstrong defeated Cephalino Garcia. They did not want Henry Armstrong to become a black middleweight champion. The last black middleweight champion that you had was William Gorilla Jones. Had Henry Armstrong been treated fairly in that fight, he would have been a 4-division world champion. First time that has ever happened, and that was not going to be allowed. March 29th, 1940, Joe Louis scores a second-round knockout over Johnny Paycheck in New York's Madison Square Garden. March 27th, 1940, Holman Williams defeats Izzy Genazzo in 10 rounds, Scranton, Pennsylvania. April 29th, 1940, Coco Kid defeats Albert Chalky Wright in 10 rounds, Baltimore, Maryland. Let's unpack that for one moment. The manager of Chalky Wright was Eddie Mead. Eddie Mead was the manager for Henry Armstrong. He was the manager for Barney Ross. He was also the manager for Charles Bud Taylor. And so Coco Kid has stopped by for a sparring session, and he sparred with Chalky Wright. And the way he handled Chalky Wright, there was no way in the world that he'd be given a title shot in the middle or welterweight division as an established champion. July 3rd, 1940, Jimmy Bivens had defeated Charley Burley in 10 rounds in Melville, Pennsylvania. July 17th, 1940, Henry Armstrong had defeated Lou Jenkins, stopping him in 6 rounds. New York's Madison Square Garden. It was in defense of his welterweight championship crown. July 29th, 1940, Charley Burley would draw 10 rounds with Georgie Abrams, Melville, Pennsylvania. Let's unpack that one moment. Charley Burley defeated Georgie Abrams. They decided to make it a draw. When there's a draw, there's no loser. Charley Burley does not advance. Georgie Abrams would have one portion of the title now. He was in line to face Tony Zale, who would have the other portion of the title. Tony Zale and Georgie Abrams would unify that middleweight championship division. Tony Zale wanted no part of Charley Burley. He did not allow Charley Burley to defeat Georgie Abrams. August 12, 1940, Coco Kid would lose 10 rounds to Georgie Abrams, Washington, D.C. The NBA World Welterweight Championship crown. Let's unpack that. Georgie Abrams does not defeat Coco Kid. Coco Kid was not given an honest decision. Georgie Abrams, who was a very good fighter, advanced. He gets past Burley. He gets past Coco Kid. Now he takes on Tony Zale. September 3rd, 1940. Charley Burley defeats Jimmy Bivens, Melville, Pennsylvania. September 4th, 1940. Holman Williams loses 10 rounds to Izzy Genazzo, Washington, D.C. Izzy Genazzo was an outstanding fighter. October 4th, 1940, Ray Robinson makes his professional debut against Joe Escoveria. Joe Escoveria was a Puerto Rican lightweight who lived in the Bronx. He was a cab driver. Reminded me of Carlos Ortiz in that way. And Ray Robinson would make short work of Joe Escoveria. Later that evening, Henry Armstrong would attempt to defend his welterweight championship crown against Fritzy Zivic, New York's Madison Square Garden. Let's take a look at what happened. Fritzy Zivic knew every trick in the book. He was the Bernard Hopkins in terms of knowing how to upset your opponent. Knew how to hit the man on the hips on the opposite side of the referee. How to eye gouge in this case. How to grab a man in the throat. How to rake the laces of his glove in the eyes and the cuts of the opponent's face. Now, this fight took place October 4th, 1940. Henry Armstrong defended his welterweight championship crown 5 times in 1 month of October. In 1937, you would have 27 fights, 26 knockouts. The only man he didn't knock out was Aldous Burley. Along the way, he would pick up the featherweight championship crown. Yes, I said featherweight. 1937, Henry Armstrong was a featherweight. 38, he would go straight up to the welterweight division, capture that title. He would drop back down, cutting weight, to the lightweight division the same year in 38. 39, he would have 5 title defenses in October alone, but he would have over 20 fights in 1939. He would have several fights in 1940. He was burnt out when he met a fighter like Fritzy Zivic, who was constantly putting pressure on his shoulders, bending his neck down, eye gouging him, and so on and so forth. October 21st, 1940, Lloyd Marshall would lose 10 rounds to Teddy Roth in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. January 17th, 1941, Henry Armstrong lost by a technical knockout, 12 rounds, by Fritzy Zivic in New York's Madison Square Garden. It was for the World Welterweight Championship crown that now belonged to Fritzy Zivic. Ray Robinson was in the second row. It was at that point when he decided he wanted to get revenge in behalf of his idol, Henry Armstrong, and he wanted to fight Fritzy Zivic. February 7th, 1941, Lloyd Marshall loses 10 rounds to Willis Shorty Hughes, Sacramento, California. Now, Shorty Hughes had a big brother named Big Boy, and they fight mostly in the West Coast. Archie Moore met both of them several times, as well as Eddie Booker. June 9th, 1941, Ezra Charles will lose 10 rounds to Ken Overland, Cincinnati, Ohio. That same day, Curtis the Hatchet Man Shepherd would defeat Lee Q. Murray in 10 rounds, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Also that same day, Lloyd Marshall would defeat Shorty Hughes in 10 rounds, Sacramento, California. June 18th, 1941, Joe Louis would knock out Billy Conn at New York's Yankee Stadium in 13 rounds. Now, July 2nd, 1941, Jimmy Bivens would defeat Curtis the Happy Man Shepherd, Melville, Pennsylvania. Defeat him in 10 rounds. July 14th, 1941, Jimmy Bivens would defeat Lem Franklin, Chicago, Illinois. July 14th, Charley Burley would defeat Gene Buffalo. He would knock him out in 5 rounds. July 17th, 1941, Henry Armstrong would stop Lou Jenkins, New York's Madison Square Garden. Lou Jenkins would be a lightweight champion after he would knock out Lou Ambers in 3 rounds, cracking his jaw, sending him in the hospital. Henry Armstrong would stop Lou Jenkins in 6 rounds. July 17th, 1941. July 21st, 1941, Ray Robinson defeats Sammy Ingot 10 rounds in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Now, Sammy Ingot couldn't make weight. And so there was a title shot that was at stake. And Ingot didn't want his title to be put on the line. So he didn't make weight. There would be an agreement between both men. We'll come in at 136.5 pounds. And we'll get this weight situation straightened out, and you will get your title shot. August 25th, 1941, Charley Burley defeats Otto Blackwell in 10 rounds in Melville, Pennsylvania. September 19th, 1941, Ray Robinson knocks out Maxi Shapiro in New York, stopped him in 3 rounds. Had a friend named Teddy who was a manager of Maxi Shapiro. September 25th, 1941, Ray Robinson would defeat Marty Servo, 10 rounds, in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. October 31st, 1941, Ray Robinson would defeat Fizzy Zivic, New York's Madison Square Garden, 10 rounds. He would get his revenge. And he said later on in an interview, he learned more about the game of boxing fighting Fizzy Zivic than he did in his whole career. January 7th, 1943, Jimmy Bivens had defeated Ezzy Charles in 10 rounds, Cleveland, Ohio. January 4th, 1943, Willie Joyce lost in 15 rounds to Luther Slugger White in Maryland. It was for the Maryland World Lightweight Championship recognition. January 11th, 1943, Jack Chase defeats Eddie Booker in 15 rounds for the California Middleweight Championship crown. January 15th, 1943, Holman Williams loses 12 rounds to Coco Kid in New Orleans. February 19th, 1943, Charley Burley defeats Jack Chase in 10 rounds in Hollywood, California. February 26, 1943, Jimmy Bivens defeats Anton Christopheridis, 10 rounds. Anton Christopheridis would become a light heavyweight champion. What happened to Jimmy Bivens? March 2nd, 1943, Henry Armstrong loses 10 rounds to Willie Joyce in Los Angeles, California. April 3rd, 1943, Charley Burley would defeat Little Tiger Aaron Weed in Oakland, California, 10 rounds. April 19th, 1943, Charley Burley would have a 10-round draw with Coco Kid, New Orleans. April 22nd, 1943, Lloyd Marshall would defeat Anton Christopheridis again. March 31st, 1943, Lloyd Marshall wins in 8 rounds in a stoppage against Ezra Charles in Cleveland, Ohio. May 14th, 1943, Charley Burley has a no contest with Holman Williams in Hollywood, California. That would be their 7th and last bout. They were split victories, 3-3. Williams would win 3, and Burley would win 3. And their last fight was a no contest. June 8th, 1943, Lloyd Marshall would lose 13 rounds by Jimmy Bivens in Cleveland, Ohio. July 21st, 1943, Lloyd Marshall defeats Curtis the Hatchet Man Shepard in 10 rounds in Cleveland, Ohio. January 19th, 1942, Holman Williams defeats Coco Kid in 12 rounds in Baltimore, Maryland. February 26th, let's go back to 1942. Charley Burley defeats Holman Williams, Minneapolis, Minnesota, in 10 rounds. March 2nd, 1942, Coco Kid loses 15 rounds and loses the Colored World Middleweight Championship crown to Holman Williams. March 6, 1942, Bob Montgomery loses 12 rounds to Sammy Ingot, New York's Madison Square Garden. March 27, 1942, Lloyd Marshall wins in 10 rounds over Johnny Bannett Romero. March 27, 1942, Holman Williams loses 6 rounds to Coco Kid, New York's Madison Square Garden. May 25, 1942, Charley Burley loses 10 rounds to Edward Charles in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. June 23, 1942, Holman Williams loses 10 rounds to Charley Burley. June 29, 1942, Charley Burley loses 10 rounds to Edward Charles. July 7, 1942, Bob Montgomery defeats Sammy Ingot in 10 rounds, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. July 31st, Ray Robinson defeats Sammy Ingot, New York's Madison Square Garden. Ray Robinson would never get a title shot with Sammy Ingot because Ingot would retire from the ring and make a comeback a few months later. And my point is, I'm trying to show you what is happening to the black fighters during this era. October 26, 1942, Henry Armstrong would defeat Fitzy Zivic in San Francisco, California. He defeated him 8 rounds to 2. December 13, 1942, Lloyd Marshall would defeat Charley Burley in Los Angeles, California in 10 rounds. December 13, 1942, Lloyd Marshall defeats Charley Burley. And September 28, 1942, Eddie Booker would defeat Lloyd Marshall in 10 rounds, San Francisco, California. So that's the end of this video. We'll do a part 3 in the next video. Look out for that video of the Black Murdersrow schedule to find out why they were not worthy of a title shot. Scrapbook Boxing, Museum of the Forgotten Fisticuff series. All great fights and all great fighters will never be forgotten on my channel. Thanks for watching.